Welcome all. So what you were just listening to was the musical score that Peter Schuback composed specifically for this wonderful new book. And, I just want to say, I'm so delighted to be presenting this book. I'm Erica Wetter, executive editor at Stanford University Press, where I manage our literature and philosophy titles. And I am pleased to introduce you to Michael Marder's book, Green Mass, The Ecological Theology of St. Hildegard of Bingen. As we confront the challenges of climate change, I think it's more important than ever before to publish work that engages with critical questions about ecology and the environment. And what I love about this project is the way in which Marder stages a fresh encounter between present day and pre-modern concerns as regards ecology and theology, philosophy and mysticism, and the material and the spiritual. Introduced with a foreword by Marcia Sá Cavalcante Schuback, who has also joined us today. This deep dive into Hildegard's thought truly couldn't be more relevant. Environmental issues are particularly important to me, and so I'm just really honored to have this on SUP's list. Another exciting aspect of this project, as you surely know, is its accompaniment by Peter Schuback's stunning musical movements, which echo Hildegard's own compositions and speak to key themes in the book. You heard these compositions as you entered our talk today, and we'll also revisit them a little bit at the end of the talk. We're also very lucky to have Peter here with us today to discuss his process. And I want to give a shout out to Faith Stein, who was the editor, the acquisitions editor for this book. So hi, Faith, we're glad to have you here. Some nuts and bolts in terms of process. Our event will be about 45 minutes to an hour. We'll of course leave some time at the end for questions. During the talk or after, you can submit these through the Q&A function in Zoom. We'll be using that as opposed to the chat or the raise hands function. And just to launch things, I wanted to provide some brief biographical information for our speakers. So Michael Marder is Iker Basque Research Professor in the Department of Philosophy at the University of Basque Country. His writings span the fields of ecological theory, phenomenology, and political thought. And he's the author of numerous articles and books, including Plant Thinking, Dust, Energy, Dreams, Dumb Philosophy, Hegel's Energy, and numerous others. Marcia Sá Cavalcante Schuback is a specialist in phenomenology, German idealism, contemporary philosophy, and aesthetics. Professor of philosophy at Södertörn University in Sweden. She is author of several books, including Time in Exile and Conversation with Heidegger, Blanchot and Lispector, and the Fascism of Ambiguity. And Peter Schuback is a cellist and composer who's presented his work internationally in Europe, North and South America. He's primarily worked with contemporary chamber music and recitals and uses his experience as a cellist to guide his compositions. So thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us today. I'm eager to hear you speak about this wholly original multimedia project. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
So, hi, Erica, thank you very much. And thank you, Stanford University, for organizing this very exciting moment together with Michael Marder and Peter Schuback. And I am supposed to make a short presentation of the book, a quite amazing book and a quite intriguing, and I hope this intriguing character will be clear during this minutes we are going to be here together. This book is called Green Mass, The Ecological Theology of Hildegard, St. Hildegard from Bingen. Is written by a philosopher, a very important contemporary philosopher, and who began his first publication on Derrida, the event of the thing, the second publication about groundless existence, and the third book that Michael published is Plant Thinking. So there is something quite interesting that relate groundless existence to plant thinking, and plant is really what we see normally as what has the deepest idea of ground together. So there is something amazing growing in the long path of Michael's work. I think we are going to be back to that. But the ecological theology is a book about a very strange concept for our today. Our today totally, I'm here in Brazil now, where we are testimony the deforestation of existence, the destruction all over the world. So Brazil is really, really the epicenter of not only climate change, but the political of destruction that is attached to the big problem of global warmth in the planet. Because it's not only a natural process, it's really a huge political question. And what's happening is that how to speak about this central concept that Michael makes growth, which is viriditas, which is greening green, which is freshness, which is the green. So how to, as a philosopher, to engage with the questions that are really suffocating us and demanding from us attitude in thought, in practices, in existence. So how to deal with this central concept, viriditas? And viriditas is strange because when even if you don't know a lot of Latin language, the ear go along to veritas, to truth. So there is something relating truth and the green, freshness. How to speak about freshness today when everything seems so exhausted, so arid. And that is really the point that Michael begins and center his incredible thoughts, putting one against the other, the concept of viriditas, the green, and ariditas, which is the aridness, how to say it is really dryness of life, of existence, of thought, of attitudes, and so on. So this is a central concept from which he reads the whole theology of Hildegard von Bingen. For those who do not know Hildegard von Bingen's work, this medieval, this incredible non-abbess from the 1000 year, living in Germany, grounding a language, the mystique, the Wörter mystique, it is the mystical of the word, is really the birth of the modern language. And an incredible woman, not only to her time, but an incredible woman in the history for being so capable to engage with philosophy, with theology, with physics, with minerals, with vegetation, with medicine practices, and so on. So Hildegard von Bingen is brought and read. He's having a composer herself and a poet, big poet, so Hildegard was. So how to address this huge monumental work done by a woman in so early times of Europe history through a concept, the concept of viriditas. So Michael Marder engaged in a philosophical work in which the very distinction between philosophy and theology becomes, how would I say, more insignificant, because at stake is really the human thinking, bodily thinking, engaging experience with the world, and the world understood from the growth of life. So how do you think this in a time that is demanding from us really the care for the growth of life, for the life of growth? I think this is the main question in Michael's book, and the way he also, through this reading, a reading translation of her poems, of her songs, of her thoughts, also in a very beautiful translation from Latin to English, is really to understand what does to grow means. because we usually use this word that's common and we think we know what to growth means. But in this book, we learn what does it mean to growth? And to growth is something strange, not only becoming bigger and bigger and bigger, but to growth into orderness, to growth not only to become an order, but to growth into orderness, to let orderness, which is the law of life, become itself growth. And this is quite interesting that Michael made this book and invited a composer, Peter Schubert, a cellist, to write, to compose to each chapter a piece. So what is amazing is to see why, I think this is one of the questions for afterwards, why this question in Hildegard from Bingen, despite she was a composer, we know she was a composer of sequences and so on, why should this dialogue be between thinking in music rather than thinking in literature, for instance, which is one of the definitions of the series, one of the series that Michael added on critical plant studies. So this is one question. But I think that maybe the key in the short preface I wrote about this connection has to do with this way of growing into othering, which somehow is the very essence or the core of music experience. So maybe this very, very general presentation of the book that we are going to deepen during these minutes of being together here, I can pass the word to Peter Schuback, who will speak a little bit about music, and then we go back to Michael and really begin to discuss all the things for the sake of letting the book appear in all its force and living force. Please, Peter.
Okay, I will try to tell something about how I thought and how the thoughts were together with Michael. I hope he'll understand it, even if most people doesn't. I will tell you about my ideas and how the ideas came together with Michael. When Michael asked me to do this job, I was very happy because I had been thinking a rather long time on Hildegard from Bingen, not planning anything to make any work, but seeing her as a composer. Actually, I don't think she is a real composer in our sense of today, how we see to know composers. She's something else. She is wider, and the task of a composer is always a little bit different from each time period, each epoch. I think the composers of today are more or less from Haydn to our time. Now will come something else. I had some ground ideas about the music. One is the instrumentation. Will I think about another one about the resonance. Of course, those things comes together. And while composing, and Michael sent me the texts, and I figured out that I should not try to make any answers, not any questions. I would put myself somewhere between and just to go on with it. It made it easier for me also to structure it together with Michael. We didn't know in the beginning that it should be a mass. We came to that later. And there was nothing said about the time. I had to think about should it be as a CD sticked in the book, then it could be not too long and not too short either. But then we found out this, the edition found out this possibility to not use the CD because the most users are not having any CD player in their laptops ever today. And that was also a strange thing because when you're making some recorded music or electrical music, you need loudspeakers are very good. But most people are listening to their small laptops, and the sound is not very good. So I have to consider that question rather much, and it was difficult for me. One of the things, the first thing, the instrumentation of Hildegard's music. I've been listening the last years. Someone in the radio said that now we're going to listen to a not instrument piece from Hildegard. A not instrument piece. She didn't wrote any instrumental pieces. She was just making some melodies, some sequences, and some notes. And it was very, very strange. And people are today playing just a melody, but the words are so important for Hildegard in those melodies. And people are playing that in an instrument like it was composition. I think they are doing this. It's a way of surfing on a big artist. I will not say composer. I say a big artist who creates very much. It's make a profit out of it. And she was the sound, the proper singing has been very different. In her time, when we're singing those things, it was singing for interior, for yourself. It was speaking with yourself, like the music was a sort of concrete thinking and not performing. With the time today, up to date, the music has become, the singing has become performing. And the instrumental thing, which I use very much, I transfer it, I take our time into it, is instrumental. So I change it and making it various time epoch. I think have a part where they're playing a strange cello, which is going to try to be a drum or something like this, some peculiar sound. And if you look at singing of today, we can sing at home, we can sing a little bit of melody, we can go for ourselves, we can sing, that's singing. But if you go to Wagner, the singer of Wagner's, they are more instrumental. And the instruments has becoming the singing parts. And sometimes we can even hear that the percussionists, they said, we have to sing. And the pianist are speaking of singing. Of course, there is a singing because it's a thinking of relations. So I wanted to change all of this, put the role of the singing where it is, to transform it from the singing to instrumental, and making the instrumental to singing somehow. I don't know if I succeed, but it was very, very interesting to work with it. I must say, and the whole project was helped me to resolve this problem and think about it. Another part of my composition was the resonance. As the resonance is timing, I use all the time the resonance in different manners. Everything is coming up and coming down, and in different sorts of resonance. Sometimes it can be a music taking another part, referring to something else, but it goes further on. And sometimes you hear it as a resonance, as a reverb in the music. I will not go very deeply into that. I can just explain the bells you hear in the beginning of this piece we just heard in the introduction here. There are some bells. That was a rather peculiar thing I found out, because I'm all the time using the melodies in all parts of the mass. It's the music or based on the music of Hildegard. And those bells were made like that on a piano. The piano has 3 strings for each note, and I discorded 2 of the strings, and I play the melody. then it's coming in completely, you can't nearly hear the melody, but you hear other notes, and that makes the sound of the bells. That was just a technical detail, and that's many others. And the string quartet we heard in the last, one of the last moments in Kisses, I must say, I'm playing all instrument myself, and it's sort of, yeah, it's written notes in that part. So I played it and several times and make it up on it and another. So well, that's more or less what I can say as an introduction of the piece. There is much more to say. I could speak an hour, but I don't think we have time for that. So I let the word go further on to Michael. Perhaps you will say that everything was I said was wrong. We will see what you think. So please, Michael, take the word from me.
Yes, thank you so much, Peter and Marcia. It's really a pleasure to be here with you and with our audience members and people from Stanford University Press. And I really wanted to start by expressing my gratitude, an absolute sense of gratitude for your being with me in this book, in the life endeavor of being friends and thinking and listening together. So this book is a bit of a tip of an iceberg of something much larger and much greater that I wanted to acknowledge and thank you, of course, in a very insufficient way, as it always is. And I think just on this very preliminary level of thinking about the process, as it were, of thinking together and listening together, a key issue for me, and I think also for Peter and for Marcia, correct me if I'm wrong, was also the question that was always in the background of what it means to be a contemporary. What does it mean to be a contemporary? How is it that someone who lived almost 1,000 years ago could be actually our contemporary in the task of thinking and in the task of listening? How can we be contemporaries with one another across these different realms of being and action and interactivity and interpassivity as well? Interactivity does not go without a certain interpassivity. There is no listening without this interpassive relation. How can we be contemporaries with each other, with the world that is literally burning and dying, and with Saint Hildegard of Bingen, who lived chronologically almost 1,000 years ago, but whose thought is more actual and more contemporary today than perhaps it was in her times. And I think this was an overarching question, not so much explicitly addressed, but always in the background of the book as a whole in its various dimensions. So I'm not sure if that was the case for you, Peter, and for you, Marcia, this question of contemporaneity as well.
If I may say, when I listened to you both, and Peter was talking very much about singing and then about time, I was thinking about how thinking and singing are so close in English. Of course, we can just listen to both words, but also to how music could be explained, the urgency to have music in this project because of this question of time and the contemporary. So I think this is, and then it reminds me a word by St. August saying that the past grows. So the past, we are talking so much nowadays about the past, retrieving the past, reconciliation with the past, and so on. But we many times forget that the past is not only something that should be recalled or remember or should be, how to say, justified or account with the past, but the past grows. And maybe this was something that the book, our book, or I would say your book, Michael, I just include myself a little bit, is that really it's a lesson to understand in a very intrinsic way how the past also grows, and that can be a help or a key to understand our contemporaneity. And maybe Peter would say something.
Oh, as you said, the past, I think that the music shows that the past is present.
Yes, the past is present, and it is present in a living way, not only as something there. No? That's why I was underlying this growth. And so maybe this could be a link to a question for you, Michael, is I have, in fact, two questions. And one question is how the whole project, because when you wrote to Peter and to me, we got, oh yes, wonderful, but we didn't ask why. We just, a friend writes and we just take like this, oh, embrace, wonderful, welcome. But the question is, how the project was born? The need in the whole of your thought. You are the thinker of planned thinking. You have a project not only to engage philosophically with the questions of ecology, but also to ecologize or vegetalize, I'm sorry for my English, philosophy. So there is something, philosophy cannot only be, the philosophical categories shall not only be thrown upon as phenomenon, but the urgency of the phenomena, ecology and so on, urges a transformation in philosophy. So, and the question is how it was born and how you felt immediately the need for the music. So this is one question. And the other is how you see this book in the whole of your work and that you are thinking now. So I ask two questions, maybe that can give you the opportunity to make a larger speech.
I think it's very important to say that Michael, you didn't said make the project is going to be like here. I want this that way. You let the project grow from itself. So when I was starting with composing, you were starting to sending me some text I could read and I could make my relation to them without any obligation to you. So the whole thing grew from itself together.
Yes,
that's a very important for a creation work. Yes. Therefore, it was working without any problem, actually, I must say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. I agree with both of you, Marcia and Peter. The project really grew plant-like, and I think it is not by chance, because I turned to Saint Hildegard von Bingen when I read just small parts of her poems or hymns and the book of mystical visions, Scivias. And I recognized immediately that she was a plant thinker, not only because her project in theology was so strangely reverberating with what I was trying to do with Western philosophical canon, which is to vegetalize it, to start letting it grow and decay, because there is no growth without decay. All grows from decay itself. So this is what we mean when we say something grows. It is in an immediate connection to the residues and remnants of past life, which are nourishing life in the present, that are not just gone, but are nourishing really subterraneously. And Hildegard was doing this with the Judeo-Christian theological canon, vegetalizing various figures in it, assigning vegetal processes, parts, kinds of plants to saints, to Mary and Jesus, and so on. But beyond the content of her endeavor, I felt that her method, her mode of thinking and being and feeling and composing was also vegetal. So it is not just focusing on the vegetal content, but the living form and the method of going about it. They are completely at one with that vegetal content. And I recognized that in her work, and I think this was really my dream and the dream come true for our book, that it would grow in this fashion. So I'm very happy to hear that this was perhaps the case, at least according to some of our assessments. And of course, the musical aspect of the project was not only influenced by the importance that music had for Hildegard, not only as a part of liturgical service, but on a much deeper level, as her view of existence as a whole, the meaning of being for her was musical, was symphonicity, was sounding together. Starting with the co-sounding of the soul and the body and the resonances of different souls, soul-body units, and so on and so forth. So music had to be present not only as a practice, but also as an animating force, once again, for the whole project. And that is why I was so happy with Peter's participation and contribution to this kind of vegetality of vegetalization of music itself also, because we could say that that this gives us a different sense, a different tinge of what it means to speak about and to think ecologically. Ecology as a co-sounding of existence, of beings, the logos that actually resounds, the vocal, the resounding notion of logos, and the voice that is not obviously only human, but a human voice is only one among many in this co-sounding of what ecology might mean. So this was for me the importance of the musical part of the project. But I was also asked to share my thoughts on the book, perhaps more formally, and I didn't want to recapitulate what is in the book because the book is there and you can, if you wish, everyone can consult it. But what I want to present, to give you just a small taste of the reverberations of this project, of its afterlife, of how it keeps living, and specifically in how we can think about the notion of ecological literacies with Saint Hildegard. Because if we think about this word literacy, it is literally a question not of education, but of the letter, litera. It is the question of the letter, not of education, literacy. And more than that, it is a question of the letter in the two senses that the word has in English, which is as a symbol of the alphabet and as a piece of correspondence, a letter I send to someone and a letter that stands usually for a certain sound. So it is my hypothesis that ecological literacies may learn a great deal from the literalization or even hyper-literalization of the letter, and that they may do so by turning to Hildegardian corpus. So it is not, all of this can be dismissed as, oh, just yet another metaphor, another symbolism, allegory. But what I insist on in Hildegard, we have a hyper-literalization of various things that give us much more to think than elaborate allegories or metaphors do actually. Hyperliteralizations can be much more allegorical, in other words, than the allegory. After all, Hildegard, who was exquisitely attuned to the vegetal world, which was at the core of her theological and scientific endeavors, as we've said, corresponded through letters with the leading personalities of her time. And she also invented, as Marcia mentioned, a language called lingua ignota, the unknown language, which had its own ignotas literas, the unknown letters. So who then can better than her spell out the sense or the senses of ecological literacy? And so I will very briefly touch upon some of these literal notions of literacy and ecological literacy with Hildegard. Now, the first and perhaps the most conspicuous point about Hildegard's approach is the mutually exclusive relation between conventional literacy and theological ecological literacy that she insists upon, especially in her letters. So to be literate in the text that we read in a book is usually mutually exclusive with ecological literacy. Writing, for instance, to Eberhard, Bishop of Bamberg, Hildegard argues that her words are not really hers. And this is a very famous part of the letter. She says, "I'm but a poor woman looking out into true light, in which I have seen and heard the true vision of what I'm expounding before you. And this exposition does not consist of my words, but of true light, which has no defects and which I hereby transmit. In huc modum transmitto." Right? And in a more detailed fashion, Hildegard explains in another letter to Gilbert of Gemblot, dating from 1175, and again I quote, "What I do not see, I do not know, for I'm not educated. In docta sum," she says, in docta sum. I'm not educated, but I have simply been taught how to read. I'm not educated, but have been taught how to read. And what I write is what I see and hear in the vision. What I see and hear in the vision. I compose no other words than those I hear, and I set them forth in unpolished Latin, just as I hear them in the vision. For I'm not taught in this vision to write as philosophers do. And the words in this vision are not like words uttered by the mouth of man, but like a shimmering flame or a cloud floating in pure air. So this longer quotation from a letter gives you a sense of the ecological literacy that she has in mind. If Hildegard's writing is a function of hearing, which is itself relayed in visions, and hence we have a synesthetic experience that combines light and sound, then the letters and the words formed out of them are the afterglows of divine light, of a flame or of clouds floating in the sky. So it's the words of a flame, the words of a cloud floating. This is what she gives us. Her letters and words are elemental letters and words, not as elements of a spoken or written human language, but as the ramifications of the elements, fire, air, water, earth, that speak through her. They could not be any different from the writings of the philosophers. Sicunt philosophi scribunt, right? This is not what she's doing. That the writings of the philosophers, who having lost touch with elemental languages, formalize the world in symbolic systems. The ecological literacies of her visions are therefore quite distinct from the literacy implied by polished Latin, by the scholastics, and by the artificially constructed cultural frameworks for comprehending reality. Now, there is no doubt that in part, the self-presentation of a polymath, as ingenious as Hildegard in terms of a poor woman, uneducated and barely literate, was a strategic stance to adopt in a male-dominated culture dismissive of women's voices. And I think Marcia hinted at this in her remarks. Barbara Newman, who wrote a wonderful book on Hildegard, contends, and I quote, that the problem of feminine authority was no less troubling for Hildegard herself than for her auditors, since she fully shared her culture's notions of female inferiority. No matter how strong the sense of the grace that animated her, she suffered from an almost equal sense of her own implausibility as a vessel, end quote. I agree in part with this, but I think it's only half the story. And this is what I want to put to our attention and for discussion as I'm finishing these more formal remarks. It does not seem, for one, that Hildegard fully shared her culture's notions of female inferiority, since on many occasions she subverted these notions from within, placing women and virgins, starting with Virgin Mary, in the position of strength and power, of vir, compared to their male counterparts. For another, the role of a medium, an intermediary, a messenger bridging different realms, in short, the angelic and hermeneutical role par excellence, is not only a strategic adaptation, but also an ontological necessity. It was necessary for Hildegard to say this, not only out of strategic considerations, an ontological necessity assigning to the visionary the same structural place as that occupied by vegetation. Just as plants span the sky and the earth, the luminous and the dark, warmth and moisture, so the female mystic receives true light and transmits it to the rest of the world, right? Opening themselves up to solar energy, plants invent the first writing of light, a photography before photography. Receiving the shimmering and fiery discharges of divine wisdom, cast in environmental terms, Hildegard's channels theologically inflected ecological literacies. And so, just in conclusion, I think that the roughness of the unpolished conventional words and letters that she operates with, what she denominates her verbis non limatis, the unpolished words, This was probably the colloquial sense of illiterus in Hildegard's time, since it could indicate someone who had not been tutored formally, but who could nevertheless understand or even read some Latin. So this roughness of unpolished conventional words and letters that she operates with directly corresponds to the rawness of the experience of revelations, and above all to other letters and words bound by elemental grammars, by the grammars of the elements, the grammars of air and of fire and of the earth and of water, in which this experience is wrapped. Insofar as they are not merely strategic, Hildegard's professions of formal illiteracy are the underside of a plenitude that does not fit the usual forms of written and spoken expression, and that carries with it light and warmth, moisture and airy expenses, divine and ecological. And so I have to stop here to give us enough time for thinking and talking about these and related issues, but just something to put forward as a continuation of Green Mass.
I would say, Michael, thank you very much. And I was, when I listened to your, how you were going further with your thoughts, thinking about ecological literacies, and the way to describe her understanding of the lettera, of the word itself, it was for me as if the words and literacy were minerals. That was my impression when you were describing. And I was thinking all the time that what is really intriguing is when we think about move life in our Western tradition, we think about moving animals. So that's why trying to engage with nature, we see a lot of discussions about animal life and critical animal studies. And the vegetal is left apart because the vegetal is always in the same place somehow. Even if it's growing like this, it is there, non-moving. And you were showing, no, what incredible, almost, how to say, paradigm to think life is the vegetal, totally forgotten in our tradition, but also the stones and the minerals, which somehow are there. And I think that maybe this connection with the hard element, with the mass, which is homophonically in the Green Mass, connects us to music, because you cannot have music with that, without this, how to say, this mass against, without this hard element. Music, which is the utmost of fluidity, cannot exist without the literal, the litera, the stone, the mineral. Peter, I think you have something to say about it.
I can enter that a little shortly. My first relation to the Hildegard was in Rome. I found a book where she wrote about stones. It's a very long time ago. Well, I'm very, very old, and it's a very long time. It's 30, 40 years ago. And those stones were fascinating me very much, and then would I come to Hildegard. And in the music, I use some sounds of the stones. You can hear it very, very clever. And those give stones are, the sound is giving a signal to the past. This past stopped and the future starts. And that's the word.
Yeah,
it's a short comment.
Yes.
Marcia, you're absolutely right to highlight the inorganic, the mineral dimension of this, which is absolutely fundamental for the way that plants relate also to the world by channeling minerals and by creating something organic out of what is otherwise inorganic, as it were, almost alchemically. But here, in the context of a specifically ecological theology, and specifically in the context of a theology, you know that the mineral, the stone-like structure is assigned to Judaism by Christianity. It is the repressed side, even of Hildegard herself. and which I'm trying to salvage as the unconscious that is operative in her text, and as a possible hinge between Christian and Jewish mysticisms in relation to ecological thought. So when I talk about the literal and the letter of the law is Judaism, the spirit of the law is supposed to be Christianity, but the letter carries the spirit, it gives the body, it's the support without which the spirit cannot live. So the entire movement of Green Mass has to be a movement of Judeo-Christianity thought otherwise than usually imagined through this hyphenated form that combines so much histories of violence and blood, and at the same time death and obligation and so on. Yes.
Yes, that's really wonderful. I think that so far as I understood, time is running, and time is, in this chronological sense, against lifetime. The clock is always against, the clock is death. And maybe we don't have enough time to discuss more, as I could understand from our wonderful hosts that were organizing. So I think that with the connection of the mineral, the vegetal, the animal, the human, all creatures, and with their, how to say, differences, with I think the music is the sounding truth of all this growing into othering, into otherness. And maybe we could now listen a little bit to Peter's music before saying bye-bye.
was a perfect note to end on. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you to Michael and Peter and Marcia for such an engaging talk. As I said at the beginning, this is just a topic that's so important. And I feel like, I think your remarks really made clear just how relevant Hildegard's work is and just how much is there. So I encourage everyone who hasn't taken a look at the book yet and listened to the music to do both together, separate, and to revisit again and again and spread the word to anyone who's concerned about environmental issues today and interested in thinking about the intersections of ecology and theology. So yeah, thank you all so much. I think we'll say goodbye.